I would like to tell you the story of my life. I was a 25-year-old man when I became a vampire, and the year was 1791. We were living in Louisiana then. We'd received a land grant and settled 2 indigo plantations on the Mississippi, very near New Orleans. Our life there was both luxurious and primitive. There was no city in America like New Orleans, a city in which a vampire, richly dressed, might attract no more notice in the evening than hundreds of other exotic creatures, if he attracted any attention at all. If anyone stopped to whisper behind a fan, "That man, how pale, how he gleams, how he moves, it's not natural." A city in which a vampire might be gone before the words had even passed the lips.
Well, I was born in New Orleans in 1941, and I was named Howard. I was the second, and my mother and father really felt that Howard was going to be a great name of distinction for me. They felt that it was going to bring me extraordinary good fortune. So they named me Howard Allen O'Brien, and I was baptized in St. Alphonsus Church in New Orleans. It was the first day of school, and I didn't want to be called Howard in front of the other children. I didn't want people staring at me. And my mother took me up to Sister Hyacinth, and she said, "This is my daughter," and I said my name was Anne. My mother looked at me and she said, "Well, if she wants her name to be Anne, let her name be Anne."
My vampire nature has been for me the greatest adventure of my life. All that went before it was confused, clouded. I went through mortal life like a blind man groping from solid object to solid object. It was only when I became a vampire that I respected for the first time all of life. I never saw a living, pulsing human being until I was a vampire. I never knew what life was until it ran out in a red gush over my lips, my...
Well, I know when I had this dream, I was about 4 years old, and it concerned this kind of gloomy area. There were a couple of old houses back there that weren't painted, and I remember there was one house where an old lady lived who had only oil lamps, which I thought was very frightening. She had no electricity. And in the dream, for some reason, I was wandering back there, maybe trying to get home, I'm not sure. And up the street from my house came this woman walking with a prayer book in her hands, and she appeared to be made of complete white marble. And I remember asking, "Is that my grandmother?" And someone in the dream said, "No, that's somebody from previous generations who was walking in our time." We lived right on the edge of the Garden District, which I think is one of the most beautiful neighborhoods in the world, really. And it's filled with very, very large houses, which are fairly crowded together on small lots that have very, very well-developed gardens. And I grew up wandering through the neighborhood, loving those houses, really. They had a profound impression on my imagination. They had a profound impression on my personality. Well, many of these houses are haunted, and there are hair-raising stories about the ghosts. And I have a way of forgetting which ghost lives where, but there are stories everywhere.
Lord, New Orleans is full of ghosts. I remember someone saying that to the Irish, the other world is not under the earth or above the earth. The other world is right beside you. And and Ann and I grew up with the other world right beside us. And everyone believed in ghosts.
There are many spirit entities in houses and dwellings in the city of New Orleans. Many people have seen the entities, and many people have felt the presence of the entities. I'm Thomas Clark. I'm a parapsychologist. I have felt and seen both. This is the Upper Pentalba building, one of the oldest apartment buildings in the United States. I'm a resident here. There are many spirit entities here, and due to an unresolved event within their life structure. I was going from my bedroom into the kitchen, and I felt like I was in a crowded dance floor and formal attire. And there was a lot of ectoplasm, a lot of foggy mist, and it was very exciting, and I just walked through.
I remember being very, very little and trying to grasp what I was being told about what was going to happen to us after death. Everyone said that there would be Judgment Day at the end of the world. And somehow I got the idea that we would have to lie in our graves until Judgment Day, and that it was going to be horribly boring, that we would just lie there in these boxes, you know, and we'd be trapped in our bodies and we wouldn't be able to get out. And that was a notion that I was never able to lose.
This is Lafayette Cemetery. Ann and I used to play in the cemetery. You can see the graves are very close together. And it made a marvelous place just to run and hide. You could jump out and scare the bejesus out of anybody who was walking through here at the time. They found out, though, after they built these tombs, that during the epidemics, when they would bury someone in it, it was before the times of embalming. So they took to crossing the hands in the coffins, like so, and tying a bell to the inside of it. This was in case they interred anyone by mistake who was actually in a coma.
Well, we lived at 2301 St. Charles. It's right on the corner of St. Charles Avenue, which is one of the busiest streets in New Orleans. My earliest years, of course, were years alone with my mother. My father was away in the war, and I remember a sort of idyllic time, really, with just a house of women. My mother taught us prayers. She was very, very deeply religious. She had long, dark hair and very large eyes. She had a very expressive face and a beautiful voice, and she was the finest storyteller of anybody that I've ever known. And I remember once we were passing this house on St. Charles Avenue, and she said, that house is haunted. There was a beautiful woman, and she was sitting in the front room at her dressing table, and she was brushing her hair, and suddenly, for no reason whatsoever, her hair burst into flame. I remember being horrified, just absolutely horrified.
We were raised very permissively, and we were allowed to do pretty much what we wanted. And we were allowed to ride our tricycles and our scooters all up and down the hall of the house. And we did cartwheels around the living room floor. We drew on the walls if we wanted to with crayons.
She had some very strong ideas about rearing 4 geniuses. That's what she wanted us to be, and she would even remind us that behind every great person is a great mother. To remember her when we became great people. Never lived. It's incredible to be back here. Oh, just incredible. And here's the living room that seemed so huge to me when I was a child. This was my mother's room. And her bed was right here, and there was a little gas heater there. There was the mantle there, you can still see. And boy, this is amazing. It feels exactly the same.
She was afraid of the dark. Sometimes I would stay up with her at night because she was afraid to be alone. She was afraid of rats and mice, of which there are plenty in New Orleans. She was a very frightened person.
He came in from the courtyard, opening the French doors without a sound. A tall, fair-skinned man with a mass of blonde hair and a graceful, almost feline quality to his movements. He stepped close to my bed and leaned down so that his face was in the lamplight, and I saw that he was no ordinary man at all. His grey eyes burned with an incandescence, and the long white hands which hung by his sides were not those of a human being. I think I knew everything in that instant. I forgot myself totally.
When you're exposed to all of the supernaturalism in the Catholic faith, it's just one step forward to the other side.
Spirits haunt houses sometimes. They follow people around and then enter with the people. So I'm going to prepare a solution to cleanse the house, to remove any negativity or evil eyes, evil thoughts, evil tongues, evil minds, witchcraft, any form that would be not good for the people here. So I'm going to prepare the wash with some ammonia. This is called cascarilla, which is made from holy water, and we also call it a peace powder. We always use rum. The blessing of God, the blessing of God, and angel. It's the blessing of God and blessing of my guardian angel, blessing of the guardian angel of all the people here, with the blessings of Rimalino, with the blessing of Santa Rayo, with the blessing of Temlatera, blessing of Mama Chula, blessing of Mariagua, blessing of Saravanda, blessing of Lutecito, blessing of all the 7 African powers. Campala Luisa se rompió, yo manda mi ganga compone, al fico florido, vi medio, onde viva. Mariagua, vivo yo, Campala Luisa se rompió, yo manda mi ganga compone.
In New Orleans, we grew up with a strange mixture of Irish Catholicism, mysticism, and some very powerful voodoo.
You had two faces. A lady with long hair and a man with a mustache, Joanne.
Them out of here?
They're going already.
Okay.
The vampire pressed his right fingers against my lips and said, "Be still. I am going to drain you now to the very threshold of death, and I want you to be quiet. So quiet that you can hear the flow of that same blood through mine." He held my entire prone body in check, and as soon as I stopped my abortive attempt at rebellion, he sank his teeth into my neck.
When I was a child, I was very intensely religious. With all these other little 6-year-olds, we had these impossible wings strapped to our back, and they were really, really agonizing kind of a device. And we came down the aisle, and there were so many flowers that the perfume was just thick in the air for blocks around the church, just thick.
Candles burned in the upstairs parlor, and oil lanterns swayed in the breeze on the gallery. All of this light coalesced and began to shimmer as though a golden presence hovered above me, suspended in the stairwell.
When I was about 13 or 14 years old, I was an altar boy in this church, and I can recall one evening in the summer following the Tuesday novena, I was asked by the priest to come out and lock up the church, and I can remember passing this pew here and seeing Anne sitting in it, saying her rosary. She was almost in a state of trance.
Listen, keep your eyes wide, the vampire whispered to me, his lips moving against my neck. I remember that the movement of his lips raised the hair all over my body, sent a shock of sensation through my body that was not unlike the pleasure of passion.
Be a mystic like Rose de Lima. She could take roses and pitch them in the air, and they'd stay in the form of a cross floating in the air. I thought that was wonderful. And she wore a chain around her waist. I remember I wanted to get a chain and wear it around my waist. And she had an oratory, a little place in the backyard where she spent all her time praying. My oratory was right out here. It was right off the back porch. You'd go right outside and pray fanatically. There were moments of almost mystical union, and you think a great deal about the blood, the pain, the hurt, the wounds.
It was obvious that my mother was staying drunk at least 3 to 6 months out of the year. She didn't drink and be, a little fuzzy sometimes. Catherine drank herself into a stupor and stayed that way for months.
But she was very much of a ladylike and closet sort of drinker. She would drink at night alone. And I never recall her seeing her drinking with anyone else. She would drink alone, and then she'd just be asleep in the day when you came in her room. She'd just be unconscious, like Sleeping Beauty. She would just lie there, comatose practically. We were lying on the bed together, and she asked me to say the rosary with her. And she said that this alcohol was like a craving in the blood, that her father had had it, and then she had it. And I remember she was very frightened.
And of course, her liver was gone, I understand. I didn't know it at the time, but she wouldn't stop bleeding. And they had to take her to the hospital and have her sewn up. Well, she sobered up for a little.
Eaten. One day she said that she would love to have a glass of beer. And the doctor said, if she wants a glass of beer, give it to her. It can't hurt her at this stage. So that was the last thing that she ingested. And it was early the next morning that she died in my mother's arms.
I think at the funeral, which was not very large and was not very well attended, as I recall, that the children were more or less known. Anne, I think, just stood there and watched everything. She became, I think, that day more of a spectator than anything else.
Yes, there it is. Right there. The canal. That's it. It's a comfort to know it's undisturbed.
She would blame us for not being geniuses, that it was my fault, and perhaps Anne's fault, that she died the way she died because we disappointed her so terribly much.
I felt his teeth withdraw with such a keenness that the 2 puncture wounds seemed enormous, lined with pain. And now he bent over my helpless head, and taking his right hand off me, bit his own wrist. The blood flowed down my shirt and coat, and he watched it with a narrow, gleaming eye. He pressed his bleeding wrist to my mouth, said firmly, a little impatiently, "Louis, drink." I drank, sucking the blood out of the holes, experiencing for the first time since infancy the special pleasure of sucking nourishment. I saw nothing but that light then as I drew blood. And then I saw as a vampire. It was as if I had only just been able to see colors and shapes for the first time. My body began to ache. All my human fluids were being forced out of me. I was dying as a human, yet completely alive as a vampire.
I left New Orleans when I was almost 16, and I said goodbye to a really gothic, atmospheric sort of childhood and discovered America sort of in the suburbs of Texas where I went to high school.
Well, I first laid eyes on her in our journalism class when I was a junior in high school. And I immediately noticed that she was extremely bright, vivacious person.
He had a baby face, but he was very tall, and I thought, you know, who in the heck can that be? And at one point, he got up from his table, came back and sat down right next to me and said, "I'm tired of being alone up there by myself." And he was very self-assured, and I fell in love with him at that second.
I spent my senior year with another senior class member, dating her. Bad mistake.
I had to leave Texas. I had to go out to San Francisco, really because I had to be self-supporting, and I needed to be in a city like San Francisco where you could go to night school and work at an office job in the day.
Oh, my heart dropped out of my body. And then I knew how much it meant to me. So I found out where she was, and I wrote her a letter.
And it was a wonderful romantic letter, confessing very strong feelings and real distress that I had disappeared to California. And we began a very, very hot correspondence love affair.
And then she came back to Texas in September, and we got married. So basically, over the course of about the last 2 years before we got married, we actually saw each other about 8 days.
The flower children thing sort of happened. The hippie were living in Haight-Ashbury, and it happened around out on the street and see a few kids with long hair asking you if you had any spare nickels. And then by the end of the summer, to see that the entire world had descended on the Haight-Ashbury.
Stan was the star, increasingly well-known in San Francisco literary circles. Anne was, I think, in the eyes of a lot of people, a lot of their friends, of Stan's friends, she was almost the little wife back typing in the back bedroom.
I don't think there'd ever been any doubt in my mind or Stan's mind that we wanted to have children. And at that time, Stan had just started to teach at San Francisco State, and we thought it was the time to do it. And almost right away, I was pregnant with Michelle. So it went rather perfectly.
She was, I think, the most beautiful child I ever saw. And she was precocious and witty and all of those things that are sometimes said about bright children, but she was really an extraordinary child.
One day we were walking on the Berkeley campus, and Michelle was in the stroller, and we were walking together and talking about literature and books and things like this. And I remember Ann just stopped and looked up and said, "Oh, being here with you and Mouse," because that was what they called her. "Being here with you and Mouse, I'm so happy. I've never been so happy."
Am I damned? Am I from the devil? I was asking myself over and over. What have I become in becoming a vampire? And all the while my thirst grew hotter. My veins were veritable threads of pain in my flesh. My temples throbbed, and finally I could stand it no longer. I stood in an empty, desolate street and heard the sound of a child crying.
Kathleen Randon, 4836. Kathleen Randon, 4836.
This increase in number. So you can imagine in the blood, instead of having 5,000 white blood cells per cubic millimeters, you have 1,000,000 white blood cells. And the blood that flows to the brain is stopped, it gets clogged, they get damage to the brain, damage to the liver, and as I said, these cells are non-functional. So they can't fight infection, they can't stop from bleeding. It's in a way you eat up your own normal cells.
Well, I knew it before I got the diagnosis. I decided I knew what was wrong with her. The night before we went to the doctor, I told Ann, I think she's got leukemia. You think you're walking on solid ground, you're running along and you have a beautiful life, and it turns out that it's not an oak floor, it's the thinnest possible ice, and you go through and you fall and you fall and you fall and you fall.
She was only 5 at most and very thin, and her face was stained with dirt and tears. She sat in a dark room beside a dead woman, a woman who'd been dead for days. She begged me to help. She began to shake her mother now and to cry in the most pathetic and desperate way.
Stan and Michelle met me at the plane. She'd grown some in that time, so that's my first impression was, of course, she'd simply grown up a bit. Her cheeks were kind of puffy and round a little bit, but maybe no more than a child, not necessarily the obvious effects of the chemotherapy, but she was wearing a little knit hat. And we were walking from the gate, the terminal, into the baggage claim area, and Stan and I were talking, and she was kind of swinging. And about the time we got to the baggage area, she suddenly said, whipped off his hat and said, "Look, I'm bald." And said it with this big grin, and there are no words for that moment.
What can you say? There were splendid aspects to it. There were precious moments. We were privileged to to possess something that beautiful that meant that much? There was a thrilling quality to that?
Damned, and this is hell. And in that instant I had bent down and driven hard into the soft, small neck, and hearing her tiny cry, whispered, even as I felt the hot blood on my lips, "It's only for a moment, and there'll be no more pain." I heard her heart in that terrible rhythm, and subtle, but the rapid, tenacious heart of a child, beating harder and harder, refusing to die, beating like a tiny fist beating on a door, crying, "I will not die, I will not die, I cannot die, I cannot die."
I don't think Anne wanted to go on living. You know, she got Guillain-Barré syndrome, and I think she tried to die. And a lot of people with Guillain-Barré, a fair number of them die, you know, of respiratory failure. I think in a way Anne did die.
Anne and Stan were in very bad shape when they came back. And the funeral was in Oakland, and she was buried there in the hills. For weeks after Michelle died, Anne and Stan just...
Well, if it happened in the 70s, I don't remember it. I can say that pretty clearly. Then we became really Scott and Zelda around our house. I don't think any of our friends thought we'd be alive right now, frankly. It was severe.
I can still remember that as such a happy period of drinking all the time. There was nothing like it, like drinking all night and then walking out on the patio as the sun came up and watching the sun come up and being very, very drunk and eating potato chips and eating fried eggs and then getting drunk all over again. Oh, it was a wonderful period. It was awful, really. You know, I think alcohol betrays you very, very fast as a drug. I mean, the days of wine and roses are really brief. You know, very quickly you're into sickness and gastrointestinal pain and nightmares and inability to sleep, and you pass out, but you sleep for 2 hours and then you're up again. And that hadn't quite set in yet. I can remember just sort of a giving in to drinking in an extreme way. I really didn't care what happened, and I did love the taste of beer.
So Mouse had been dead for 3 years. We were drinking at our heaviest. And she seemed to be in a very hyped state. She would come out of the room and say that she was working on his vampire story. All night. For weeks. The lights were all on. She was going away on the typewriter. I fell asleep. So finally she finished it. And she brought it in for me to read. I read it approximately one sitting, one day. And when I turned the page over, the last page over, just like lights at Times Square going across the board, I just saw the words, "Our life will never be the same." It's absolutely, my life would never be the same. And it never was.
I'd have dreams out in California that were almost painful, where I would be in this beautiful paradisal neighborhood walking where everything was green and beautiful, and I'd wake up and realize that was the Garden District back in New Orleans. Plantation house where all the family could come, you know, and there would just be, I don't know, buildings everywhere, and people would be in the buildings, a compound. And I had seen St. Elizabeth's for sale, but I had always imagined.
It's a castle. It's like an obsession with owning a castle. The place was falling down from neglect. I can't tell you what it means to a woman to save a house. It means something beyond my ken. I don't think men exactly know what houses mean to women. It's goes beyond a nest or any such thing. It's a place of where much history went on, many souls dwell, and it's like she's saving the dead. She's saving life.
I believe that she's probably chosen this St. Elizabeth's because she'll never get finished with it. You know, it will be a project that she can keep going on for a long, long time, restoring this very big building. I think that's one reason she bought the orphanage. I don't think she wants peace. I think peace to Anne would be death.
Someone had made some crack about someone who had a dead family member. The teacher said, you shouldn't make cracks about that because certain people in here have had dead family members who have died, and so-and-so had an uncle who died, and Chris had a sister who died. I went, what? And her face went blank. And I remember saying, and I remember saying twice, I certainly did not, I certainly did not. And she took me out in the hall and told me that I did.
Life seems at times to me to be just almost unbearable. Just almost unbearable. It's just 1 inch from horrible. The amount of pain, the amount of waste, the amount of losing. And I think that that's like a vision that's always right near me. And I write, and I see my family, and I follow my obsessions, and I explore what I have to explore to fight that.
When I met her, she had a fantasy life that she'd had since she was a little girl. She would keep a narrative going at all times. And when I would walk in the room and I would see a certain expression on her face, I knew she was in her. She tells me that dream world is starting to die out, incidentally.
How many vampires do you think have the stamina for immortality? They have the most dismal notions of immortality to begin with. For in becoming immortal, they want all the forms of their life to be fixed as they are and incorruptible, when in fact all things change except the vampire himself. Soon, with an inflexible mind, this immortality becomes a penitential sentence in a madhouse of figures and forms that are hopelessly unintelligible and without value. One evening, a vampire rises and realizes what he has feared perhaps for decades, that he simply wants no more of life at any cost and that vampire goes out to die.